Thank you for tuning into North Point Making Health Happen. My name is Biftu Takala and I'm your host. This is a new series brought to you by North Point Health and Wellness Center. We want to connect with you about topics in health and wellness that impact our community. We will feature guests from our team and around the community to talk about health and wellness issues most important to North Minneapolis. Together with our guests, our community, and you, our listeners, we are partnering to create a healthier community. Today's guest is Karen Blanchard. She's a registered licensed dietitian who has been with North Point for over 15 years. She has brought the role of nutrition into various industries, including the military, corporate America, community work, and recipe development. She is a native of the South and brings with her a passion for a variety of foods, including cultural foods and new foods. She's an avid cyclist and runner and promotes exercise along with the healthy eating habits. And she's here with us today. Welcome, Karen.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us and thank you for being willing to answer our questions on nutrition. This is a very important topic, so we are excited to learn from you.
And I'm happy to be here today. Looking forward to it.
Great. So let's dive right in and talk about nutrition. Can you give us a definition of nutrition and tell us a little bit about how we determine foods to be nutritious or not?
Well, when I think about nutrition and when I'm teaching individuals, I'm looking at it from a definition that's very simple and basic to that particular person. I look at it as a way of eating and choosing foods that will give you the best outcomes for your health goals. And when I look at that, I try to have people understand that, we need to look at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, a broader sense of foods other than just looking at one group of foods. I know there are various diet plans out there that are focused on one particular thing, but when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about a variety of foods so that they can get a breath of the experience of looking at the different colors on their plate and making choices around a variety of foods.
Wonderful. I know some people might say they know and can tell you what foods are healthiest and what are unhealthiest, but can you confirm as an expert, tell us what foods are healthiest and then what are the unhealthiest?
I would like to look at it from a standpoint that we can eat all foods. It's about our
Mm-hmm.
portions. It's about
Mm-hmm.
understanding that each group of foods, let's talk about fruits and vegetables. Fruits and
Right.
vegetables is going to give us vitamins and minerals and fiber, antioxidants, and all different kinds of things that's going to complement what we need for our nutritional makeup, our healthy goals that we're looking at. That's going to vary for each person, especially in terms of their resources that are available to them, in terms of their culture and their likes and dislikes. So I really choose not to label them as good foods
Mhm.
and bad foods. Let's look at added sugars. Let's take that one for example.
Okay.
An example of an added sugar might be candy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we're looking at fruit, it's naturally sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Soda might be considered added sugar. And so when
Right.
we're looking at those foods, we're trying to decrease the frequency of eating them and the amount of food that we eat when we eat those kinds of foods. For example, if a person is drinking 12-ounce can of regular soda, 3 or 4 of those a day,
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest maybe bringing it down to a 6-ounce can and maybe doing it only once a week or a special occasion. Jellies and jams is another kind of added sugar. Let's say that for that person, I might say, if you like that, try to think about using a preserves or a jam rather than the jelly, and looking at how much you're using, maybe a half of a teaspoon or something. I know that portions sometimes are a little bit scary because it means a little bit extra work. But if we
Mm-hmm.
keep it simple and doable, by managing our portions, that helps a whole lot in trying to maintain those quantities of what we call the not so good choices and the good choices. Other foods that I would put on my list of foods that I
Mm-hmm.
would look for and suggest that people think about: lean proteins, and then limiting the beef to maybe once or
Mm-hmm.
twice a week. Um, I try to complement individuals with their lifestyle, their family size, because we're talking about monies to buy these things, and
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about food preparation. All of these things come into play when we're talking about making these choices around good nutrition.
Well, speaking of choices, one thing I feel empowered to do when I go grocery shopping is look at nutrition labels and the nutrition facts. So, can you give us some guidance on how to read those labels?
Yes, I love nutrition labels. They're a very important tool that's available to all of us to use. I'm gonna speak to it on a couple of different levels. First of all,
Hmm.
labels have changed somewhat. They sometimes have been a little bit confusing, and so we're
Right.
continually trying to teach and revise them to help the user in having a more comfortable, friendly experience. One of the things I always talk about when reading a nutrition label is get familiar with the serving size. And that was one of the changes that they've made recently, making those serving sizes something that are more recognizable and understandable.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing. Be aware of what that serving size is. I'll give you a good example. Ramen
Okay.
noodles.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, will eat, one person will eat a package of ramen noodles, but that's actually two portions, you know?
Hmm.
And then when you're
Hmm.
looking at the sodium content is based on that one portion. But if
Right.
you'd have to double it if you eat the whole pack to realize that
Hmm.
you've eaten a lot more sodium than you thought you had. So we really want people to look at that serving size as the first thing. And then we want to look at the grams of the sodium or the grams of carbohydrate. Another
Hmm.
thing is the percentages on the side. Those percentages on the side can also be very helpful at a quick glance. So, for example, if you're looking for your sodium, if you're looking for something less than 7% or less than, you're looking at the different percentages, that gives you an
Hmm.
idea of what you're getting when you eat that serving size. I keep going back to serving size because
Hmm.
we sometimes forget it is about the portions.
Right.
One other thing I want to add to the nutrition label, that information is so helpful with meal planning, looking
Hmm.
at how many it's going to feed for the family that you're preparing this a particular food for. But don't forget to also look at the ingredients. It's another part of that label. It's not
Right.
necessarily the nutrition facts, but it's another important part of that label. The ingredients section oftentimes is listed, whatever is first is the most that's in that particular food product that you're purchasing.
Right. Great. Okay. Good reminders. So let's talk about uh, the scientific part of it. And so, talking about macronutrients and micronutrients and um, our body and why it needs that. So, can you tell us about what those are?
So macronutrients, we're generally speaking carbohydrates, proteins, and fats.
Hmm.
They're the main drivers of our health. For
Hmm.
example, oftentimes people say carbohydrates are bad for you. They'll
Sure.
sometimes use the word carb. I
Right.
teach people carbohydrates are not bad for you. It's
Hmm.
oftentimes how much we're eating, portions, how
Right.
often we're eating them, frequency, and what
Hmm.
time we're eating them. And then thinking about some of them, the nutrition is a more it's given to us in a way that's a little bit more denser. Let me give you an
Hmm.
example of that. For
Sure.
example, let's look at fruits and fruits. Fruit is
Hmm.
a carbohydrate, okay?
Hmm.
And then we have vegetables. That's a carbohydrate. Let's look
Hmm.
at potatoes versus lettuce and tomatoes. You're going to get a
Hmm.
heavier starch contribution. Carbohydrates, starches are carbohydrate. So you're going to get a
Right.
heavier starch contribution from those potatoes than you would the lettuce or tomatoes. So it's about what we're selecting, how we're putting it together. Earlier, I mentioned about variety and what the colors look like on our plate. Well, we're
Hmm.
building on that by looking at those macronutrients and what they're giving us. So carbohydrates, one of those. Generally speaking, we get most of our food is from carbohydrate sources.
Hmm.
Um, then proteins, usually we talk about lean proteins, chicken, fish, beef, pork, eggs, cheese, nuts, peanut butter. Those
Hmm.
are the things we're thinking about when we're talking about protein. And oftentimes for vegetarians, we're thinking about, well, can I get enough protein if I'm not getting animal protein? Yes. We've come full circle with that. We look at now that you can get protein, an adequate amount of protein without that animal protein. So beans
Mhm.
like lentils, beans like
Mhm.
black beans, pinto beans contribute protein, but we need to look at those portions. Oftentimes, and I really want to say this today, we look for a quick fix in a one
Mhm.
thing or one food. I
Right.
heard today avocados is going to help me and it's going to make
Mhm.
everything right. But we teach a full complement. We teach a variety. You might be
Mhm.
familiar with the My Plate. My Plate is talking about that variety on that plate. And
Mhm.
so we can do that if you're vegetarian. We can do that if you are eating animal proteins. There's other ways of looking at that for other diet plans. So we we when we're talking about those nutrients, those macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now let's talk about fats a little bit.
Okay.
Avocado is a good source of a good fat. It really helps
Mhm.
us. Omega-3 fatty acids.
Mhm.
Um, it's really good for us. But again, it is a fat source. So then we think about calories. I don't recommend to people to eat 3 or 4 avocados in one sitting. For
Sure.
one reason, we're limiting our variety of that meal. And for the second reason, we are getting in quite a bit of fat. Then you
Mhm.
have saturated fats, and we're trying to limit those saturated fats, trying to decrease from using like the shortenings. We're trying to get more of the oils in there. We talk about olive oil, canola oil, and there's different kinds. But one of the things that I would like to have people remember as a takeaway is
Mhm.
about your total fat intake for that day. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to have have something like bacon in the morning, and then you're going to have fried chicken and French fries for lunch, and then you're going to have something that's fried for dinner. That's
Mhm.
what we're talking about. Change it up and not have fried foods in every meal. And look at it from that standpoint. Look at those portions and frequencies of what we're doing. And we talk
Yeah.
about the micronutrients, we're talking about the
Right.
vitamins, vitamins and minerals,
Mhm.
those kinds of things that are very important for us, like vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin C. All of those things are very important. And there's been some research out there about how taking more vitamin D is going to help with this or help with, and all of that's good. But
Mhm.
none of these things should be taken in a way that we overdo anything. Vitamin D comes from the
Sure.
sun, you know?
Right.
And if let's get out there. I know right now it's cold weather and we can't get a lot of it,
Mhm.
but we do want to think about those whole foods rather than taking vitamin supplements. They are accessible to us. I'm not
Mhm.
talking against them. I think they're fine for us. But let's talk about vitamin supplementation. In order for them to be
Yeah.
absorbed, sometimes you have to take other foods with them to be absorbed properly and get the full source by looking at how it's being absorbed. For example, uh, calcium with the vitamin D to help it be
Mhm.
absorbed. Sometimes people take vitamins and don't eat. Eat something. It needs something to latch on to help us take it
Mhm.
in. I can talk forever.
Okay. No, that was a good segue for my next question because some people do take supplements and some people maybe feel like that's a quick fix. So, do
Yep.
you recommend supplements?
I I have a conversation with people about
Mhm.
why they're choosing to take the supplements first. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's convenient, people feel like
Right.
they don't have time to eat. And I
Mhm.
welcome those conversations.
Mhm.
I also feel like I need to get more and more into their lifestyle because we talk a lot about lifestyle.
Mhm.
How active you are, how many people in your family, how many jobs you have. All these
Right.
things come into play when people make these choices. So I don't usually recommend them, but there are certain conditions, possibly that people are medical conditions where they're needing some additional supplementation. I will. But off
Yeah.
the bat, for someone that's healthy, I
Mhm.
usually try to have that conversation with them, how we can make those meals a little bit more likely to give us what we need. Oftentimes
Mhm.
people feel like, well, not only that I don't have the time, it's like, well, Karen, my appetite's not where I really want to eat. Or it's
Mhm.
like, just looking at that full plate of food is just, wow, that's just not me. So we talk about how to make it work for that individual because we're all different. We're all
Mhm,
different.
mhm. We know that in times of COVID, it might be a little
Yes, hard.
difficult.
Yes,
Yeah. So can you
yes.
talk about how COVID has affected nutrition habits for people?
Well, resources are so important.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, and I've been deliberately trying not to use the word healthy. And
Hmm.
I try not to use it because it means something different to everybody.
Hmm.
And I've oftentimes heard people say, well, eating healthy is expensive. And it can be. I'm going to be
Hmm.
frank about it. It can be,
Yeah.
especially when you're thinking about your family size and trying to get
Hmm.
the portions in and the variety in and looking at, well, should I go with a package, something in the package, or should I get fresh? And then that money becomes our budget, and money becomes more of a concern. And then we
Hmm.
cut corners or we make decisions that weigh heavily on the finance side.
Right.
So I can say from some of the experiences that I've had from listening to people that they've had to make different choices.
Hmm.
And so what we try to do in terms of those choices is first to understand what those choices are. So that's one factor, is that the money. The second factor is time. We were already impacted by time. But when
Hmm.
you were in COVID, in a situation where you're at home, with your family, your kids, and you're trying to work and manage school time online and then other things and just daily activities of things you do in your home, then that impacts food preparation. It impacts the meal times, and I make that as a point because we want to eat during the day when we're most active, and when we're eating dinner at 8 and 9 o'clock, that's we're least active. Activity and what we take in, they complement each other. They work together. They kind of they set the stage for our health choices and our health decisions. So time and the impact of what's going on in your home. Same thing for a single person. Even if you're single, I still think money might be a factor,
Hmm.
and a factor in terms of meal preparation. Meal preparation can be easy if you microwave, but sometimes microwave affects the nutrient value too. How long you're putting in the microwave, how long you're cooking something. So for me, those two factors are top of mind. And what I try to do is work with people on the budgeting standpoint and say, what foods can we look at that's going to give us that nutrition punch that we can stretch? Beans are one of those.
Hmm.
Um, Certainly starting with that. Some dried beans and cooking that. Good source of potassium, protein, fiber, vitamins. It's just a good thing that we can share with the family.
Hmm.
When we're looking at the expense of fresh vegetables, look in the frozen aisle. That can help. I try to tell people if they're using frozen foods, try to get the frozen foods that are not with the sauces and the butter is added to it. Make it very simple.
Hmm.
Even with the frozen fruit, sometimes there's sugar added to that. Make sure it's just, you know, just strawberries, okay,
Yeah.
without the sugar added. If you're going to get canned goods, if you can, there's lots of different choices for that. You can get the low sodium ones, or you can get the regular ones. Just
Mhm.
pour the water off because the salt has been
Sure.
added to the liquid.
Mhm.
In terms of time, get the family together. See if
Mhm.
some of the kids are interested in cooking too. I mean,
Yeah.
and if they're at an age where they can pick up some points about cooking from mom or dad or
Mhm.
older sister, wow, that's great because they're learning something that's going to help them understand how to put it together. So those are the top of mind things that I think that are really the driving factors. Oh, there is one more I want to talk about
Sure.
too, and that's our emotions and
Mhm.
also sleep. Sleep is so important. It is the foundation for how we start our day, the foundation for how we're connecting with others and focusing and thinking. And it has a real impact on how we eat, how much we eat, what we're reaching at to eat. Sleep is so important. And our emotions, during COVID, you know, our tensions have been high. And
Mhm.
sometimes we may eat. we're not mindful, we're just grabbing. And so I think those are two additional points that I think have affected people with COVID. And not with COVID, but during this COVID period that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much to Karen Blanchard here at North Point, a registered dietitian nutritionist. Thank you for your time. Thank you for answering our questions. This has been great.
Well, thank you, Fifth Two, and I look forward to doing this again.
Absolutely.
When you walk through the doors, we're here with open arms. We know that times get hard, and we're here to help at North Point. When you're feeling low.
So, circling back to the reason we want to have this conversation, what do you want people to know about the adverse effects of a diet that lacks nutrition? What are the consequences of not having, like you say, a plate with the rainbow of foods and a variety of foods?
Well, some of the consequences are very, very much something that will affect us long term
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes short term. And oftentimes, I'm being very careful what I'm about to say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about diabetes for a second.
Sure.
Oftentimes people say that when they get diagnosed with diabetes, they feel like, oh, I know I ate too much sugar, and that's what caused it. And it's very important that we understand that there's a relationship, not necessarily one thing is going to cause something to happen. And yet, if we don't get enough carbohydrate, which is what we just talked about a little bit ago,
Mm-hmm.
we can have a low blood sugar. Our another name for blood sugar is glucose.
Right.
So I really talk about the breadth of our eating experience, and that the consequences could be such that if you're not managing your portions, not eating a variety of foods, variety meaning carbohydrates, proteins, and fat,
Mm-hmm.
that you put yourself in a situation when you do get a health concern like diabetes, it's hard for you to make those changes to eat differently so that your body is getting what it needs.
Mm-hmm.
Carbohydrate is energy, energy source for our brain, energy source for our muscles. Proteins helps build and repair those muscles. Uh, the fats are necessary for various things in our body, uh, hormones and such. And so the point I'm trying to make is that the consequences are different at different from different things that we do with our meal planning. I try not
Mm-hmm.
to say diet, I try to say meal planning.
Mm-hmm.
Another example might be hypertension. If
Mm-hmm.
we're eating too much salt,
Right.
sodium is a naturally occurring mineral in our foods, especially
Mm-hmm.
foods that we grow from the ground, from our gardens. It has
Right.
sodium in it. Sodium is not bad for us, but there's smaller quantities of the sodium that's naturally in the foods. But when we have salt, there's more sodium in the salt, and so we're adding more, and then we're getting more of that sodium in our body, which is causing us to have it elevates our blood pressure because it's working with our kidneys and what have you. So our food choices, in from that respect, will help raise our blood pressure to a point that we don't. It will possibly have us eventually have hypertension. Hypertension is when you have a pattern of high blood pressure. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily just because you have high blood pressure that you have hypertension. Those are just two areas right there. There's a different aspects about our fat intake and how that affects our heart and
Mm-hmm.
such. But we can eat good fats. And I think what has happened, we've talked about decreasing fats so much that we're forgetting that there are good fats that we can eat and that are available to us. We get a salmon is a good source of fat, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A good source of vitamin D as well. So it's all these things that we think about in terms of no, 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 yes, yes, yes. We
Mm-hmm.
need to understand that it's a balance that we're looking for. And this balance is really something that can be gained by having these discussions with dietitians, with your doctor, with your health coach, to
Mm-hmm.
help you understand that, yes, I'm ready to do these things, but it's more than just taking on one particular thing. I hope that kind of addresses what you're asking. Does that help a little bit,
Yeah.
or do you need more?
No, I think that really addresses it.